Among the many details of a German soldier's uniform in the First World War, one item often goes unnoticed: the puttee. These simple strips of cloth wound tightly around the lower leg were not decorative. They were practical, economical, and symbolic of the conditions in which millions of men fought. In this video, we'll explore why the German soldiers adopted puttees, how they were used, and what they reveal about acceptance of uniform regulations and life in the trenches. Today, our focus lies on cloth puttees, not the leather variants sometimes issued. Among the Entente, especially the French and British, the shoe-puttee combination was standard. In the Russian army it was later introduced as well. The German army, however, relied mainly on boots. The infantry had worn the same model since 1866, while the cavalry used tall riding boots. At the beginning of the war, hussars and cuirassiers each had their own style of riding boots, but in 1915 these were replaced with the unified cavalry boot. Very early in the war, German troops began requesting puttees to seal the tops of their boots, preventing small stones, sand, snow and everything alike from falling inside. The War Ministry responded quickly. For example, the Bavarian Ministry of War procured 10,000 pairs of puttees on the 23rd December 1914, followed by additional orders in February and June 1915. On the 11th February 1915, the Bavarian Cavalry Division received approval to use puttees as well. The shoe-puttee combination offered several advantages. It kept debris out of the boots, provided extra warmth in winter, and, as battlefields turned more and more into mud, reduced the risk of losing boots when slogging through deep trenches. Karl Hauswurz, born in 1896, a veteran, later recalled,
"It had been raining for 6 days and the mud was half a meter deep. I sank so far into the mud that it pulled off my boots and foot wraps. A grenade exploded near me and the pressure blew my carbine away. Next to me, the wounded and dying were screaming and shouting. I tried with all my strength to free myself from the mud and came out barefoot. There were dead and wounded people everywhere."
This happened to him while his company attacked Fort Vaux. Soon, puttees were no longer regarded as an optional extra, but became the preferred choice over traditional boots by the soldiers. This unofficial shift, however, alarmed their army administration. Officials cited health concerns, claiming that wet puttees would shrink, constrict circulation, and cause injuries. On the 18th September 1915, the Prussian War Ministry formally rejected their widespread use, outlining these supposed dangers. A few days later, on the 27th September 1915, the rejection was confirmed by an implementing provision of the Cabinet Order. Let's have a quick look right into the source. In this paragraph, basically is written that everything special is from now on cancelled, since the new uniform regulations are published. Anything unusual about the uniforms still requires the express permission of him, the Emperor. In the explanations, what is meant with this paragraph 28b lists the puttees explicitly, which means they are still forbidden or forbidden again. In September 1917, a new decree restricted puttees to specific units: the Air Force, assault battalions, mountain troops, and those wearing them for medical reasons. In practice, these restrictions proved difficult to enforce. Many units that were not officially entitled to puttees continued requesting them, and company tailors sometimes improvised by cutting up stone grey or field grey coats. This prompted yet another decree in November 1917. Even among the troops entitled to puttees, supply remained a problem. Achieving the correct field grey dye proved difficult, and a decree in July 1916 allowed them to be issued in other colors. As wool shortages deepened, puttees made of paper yarn were also distributed, though these performed poorly in wet weather. Despite bans and shortages, puttees became a familiar sight on the front lines. The idea of introducing them for all troops was considered, but rejected in January 1918. Due to raw material shortages. Officers were prohibited from wearing them in the rear, though they were tolerated at the front. Leather gaiters were planned for motorists, but a leather shortage forced the army to replace them with boots instead. Even so, NCOs and enlisted men often wore puttees with lace-up shoes, defying regulations. The uniform regulations of 1915-16 explicitly repeated the ban on both cloth puttees and leather gaiters, but enforcement remained uneven. Although exact numbers are lacking, it is clear that puttees were widely used across all branches of the army: infantry, cavalry, artillery, and technical troops alike. On the front lines, necessity outweighed rules. Since the majority of the German puttees were privately purchased, we take a look into some catalogues of that era. Originally, puttees were used for outdoor activities like hiking, skiing, hunting, hiking in the mountains and so on, as this advertisement shows. The puttees of this brand could vary very much looking at some pictures of original puttees. Apparently, the Mars brand was quite popular among the society, so this is why there are still so many variants to find in any color, ranging from beige to green and grey at least. Alright, the first catalogue we are looking into was an official supplier for officers and the army. In it, there are only leather gaiters shown, no actual puttees as it seems. It says that they are usable for the military, hunting and sports. The next catalogue is from 1912 from a former big German mail-order shop. Yes, they existed already more than 100 years ago. In it we have a full double page of gaiters made out of several materials like leather and canvas. Puttees are actually shown in the right bottom corner. The text states that these puttees are made for sportive activities, especially for winter sports as well as they are made from broad, thick Loden fabric. A catalogue from the same company, but just 3 years later in 1915, shows only one page of the gaiters now and no more puttees. My guess would be that they were out of stock and mostly taken by the soldiers or sent to the front lines, but I do not know for sure. Moving on to a catalogue of the supplier of the Austro-Hungarian KK army. Here actually the Mars puttees are offered. It is mentioned that they are needed for mountain troops, officers, hunters, tourists and some sporty activities. A few pages later, some gaiters which are made of fur and leather are offered. Another few pages later, there are some more puttees shown in the offerings, this time not branded like the Mars puttees. Again, they are made of thick Loden fabric. Further, the next describes that with the puttees, the legs stay warm and dry, so they are especially recommended for areas with a lot of snow or water. Before putting the puttees on, let's first have a look at them, like the material, what they are made of, and how they behave. The first ones are branded puttees, and really good reproductions of the originals that are shown in the pictures. On the inside there's a clothing tag which not only states the brand but also right side, left side, upside and the patent number of the DRGM. On one end they got a hook made of brass which needs to be hooked in the shoe. They are made of cotton canvas dyed in field grayish. They get fixed at the other end with a narrow strap and a slider made of brass with serrations. The flexibility of these are very low as we can see, which means they are still rather stiff. If they soften up after a while of use, that would be worth a test. The next pair of puttees is made of Loden fabric. It does not have a hook on one end, it only is edged. Seems like the color is a shade of grey, but a bit darker than usual. On the other end, it has a narrow strap without a slide or something. Testing the flexibility of the fabric, we can observe that the fabric is pretty flexible actually. Moving on to the last pair I got. It is made of grey-dyed wool, but knitted. On one end there is a hook made of black painted metal. It looks heavily used because I use it frequently, like once a week. In fact, it is a hook that is usually used on clothes and uniforms. The other end has a narrow strap and it is also knitted. For fixing, it has a slider made of black painted metal on the end of the strap. Since it is knitted, the flexibility is off the charts and so the most flexible of the three. The flexibility is important because the more flexible, the better the puttees wrap around the legs. Let's start putting them on. I begin with the brand puttees. First, it has to be hooked on the leather of the shoe, somewhere between the upper laces. Then the shoe needs to be tied up, so the puttee as well as laces get fixed on the shoe. From then on, the puttee needs to get wrapped around the leg. Before I go up, I usually start with 2 rounds around the shoe. From then on, I go up and hold the puttee firm and tight, but not too tight. I wrap it gradually so that half of the broadness of the puttee is overlapping. The problem with this one is that it is so stiff and has not much flexibility as we tested before, so we need to be really careful that it wraps well without giving much away. As we see now on the upper half, it is not easy and I had to rewrap a few times. When this is done, just hook the slider in the strap so it is fixed. Now, for comparison, I started with the knitted putty on the other leg. It needs to get hooked in the shoe as well, like the previous one. After the shoe is tied up, I again started to wrap it around my leg and again the first rounds at the top of the shoe to fix the laces and the puttee. Afterwards, going up gradually, again firm and tight, but not too tight. Compared to the previous putty, I do not have to pay that much attention to how I wrap it. Because of its flexibility, it fits snugly around the leg. I would have to look at it mostly for aesthetic reasons. On the top it is again hooking in the slider to have it fixed. This is how these look right beside each other. In my opinion, the knitted feels far better and fits pretty snugly around the leg, as we can see, while the other one is pretty smooth so that it could fall down easily and is additionally pretty stiff. Maybe the Hindenburg one needs to be worn more often or it needs to get really wet or something else. Do you guys have an idea? Both look great in color and material though. Starting with a putty made of load fabric now. Since there is no hook, the shoe is tied up before. The start of the wrapping is always the same. The first rounds around the shoe to fix the putty and the laces. Then the technique of wrapping is again the same, going up piece by piece while overlapping about the half of the broadness of the putty. This time, some attention to the wrapping needs to be done so it fits well around the leg. The fabric is sort of flexible, so it is possible to have it snugly around the leg as well. Again, firm and tight, but not too tight. Getting to the top, we got no slider this time, only the strap, so it needs to be wrapped around pretty tight too, to prevent it from falling down. The end of the strap just gets tucked under the previous wrapped part. At the end, the upper part of the putty close to the strap gets folded down just to fix it there. Comparing these two, I can say that the putty made of Loden is great. It fits pretty well and the light color is fine. Not many problems with the wrapping whatsoever. Only the knitted one fits and feels slightly better than the Loden one. So it is my favorite for sure. What do you guys think about the looks? What do you prefer? The history of the putty in the German army may seem like a small detail, but it reveals much about the realities of the First World War. Officially, the puttees were contested, restricted and even condemned as harmful. In practice, however, soldiers across all branches of the service adopted them, whether issued, improvised, or procured privately. They kept out mud, stones and snow, they added warmth, and they gave me in the trenches a small measure of comfort in an otherwise harsh environment. The persistence of puttees, despite regulations and shortages, shows how frontline necessity often outweighed administrative decisions. It is a reminder that the material culture of war was not only shaped from above by ministries and decrees, but also from below by the men who had to endure the mud, the cold, and the grind of daily service. In that sense, the puttee stands as a quiet but telling symbol of adaptation and survival on the front lines. So that's it for today. Thank you all for watching, have a good one, and see you next time. Bye!